primarily through the lens of free speech and censorship issues. That was really remains my core focus. It was really the thing that drove me into this space. But what I found is in the process of telling the story of what's driving internet censorship, the forces behind it, the government forces, the NGOs, the private corporation sponsors, given that if something is being censored, especially by a government, it has geopolitical implications. There's something the government does not want to spread. You have to understand the censorship story. You need to understand how that government works, how it's structured, how it works with partners outside the government in order to trace the funding, in order to understand the motivations, in order to propose solutions that will actually work in taking it on. And I'm delighted to see that I think a lot of the policy proposals I've been putting forward have been taken up by the White House, taken up by Congress, and it's been really the thrill of a lifetime to see it all play out this way, but there's a lot more to do.
Yeah, it feels like it was years in the making, too. Like, everyone likes to say someone's here all of a sudden, and it's like, bro, I've been on this train.
You would not believe how much of that I get. And I've I used to respond to that stuff all the time. Like, oh, and at this point, it's just water off my back. But the fact is it was absolutely that. Like, this idea that I came out of nowhere is insane. Like, I gave up everything to do this. I give the analogy, if you ever seen Conan the Barbarian, the old one with Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Yes. Yeah.
It starts off with him chained to the wheel of pain for 15 years. And that's how, according to the legend, that's how he gets so big, is that he's sold into slavery and he just pushes this wheel of pain. He just pushes a wheel around all day, every day. And that's what, the legend of Conan, that's what gives him his broad physique and, his toughness, is that wasn't some magical power. It was just being chained to this wheel of pain. And that's what it was for me. I was a corporate lawyer. I was not really a political guy. I fell into this rabbit hole around internet censorship. Free speech has just been always super important to me morally.
When did that happen, that rabbit hole, first time?
Well, the rabbit hole started really August 2016 was when it took over my life. I came across a bunch of at the time, people were trying to search for answers around what was causing internet censorship. And everyone was pointing at Mark Zuckerberg and saying Zuckerberg loves censorship, or Susan Wojcicki at YouTube, or Jack Dorsey at Twitter. And I never found that persuasive. Yeah. And I tried to search beyond that. And what I came across were basically government documents around the use of artificial intelligence to scan and ban keywords and scan and ban narratives that trend or that are, mis or disinformation or hate speech or really anything geopolitically sensitive. These were DARPA documents.
DARPA? You found DARPA?
Yeah.
You weren't in government yet at this time.
I wasn't even in
corporate
government.
lawyer.
I was a tech lawyer.
Whoa!
I was doing tech and private equity and hedge funds. That was my space.
What are you, Sherlock Holmes? How do you find DARPA documents? I need to know.
Well, I saw there was some mainstream reporting on the problems the content moderation ecosystem was experiencing, trying to deal with the Wack-a-Mole problem, which is what they called it, which was this idea that everything pre-2017, other than CP and spam, all content moderation was done manually by human reviewers and in response to things being manually flagged to them, either by their own team or usually when someone clicks the report this post or report this video, option on any social media site. And the problem was, in their view, there was so much stuff they had to censor. This was during the rise of Trump and Brexit and all these things that they were arguing would cause the end of the world, that there was no way to do that at the scale and as fast, as precise, and as comprehensive as was necessary through human means. And so there was focus at the time on repurposing a military technology that was created to do that at speed and scale to stop terrorism during the GWAT, the Global War on Terror era, and to use that for speech online against U.S. citizens and, Trump supporters, Brexit supporters, anyone who wanted to, voice an opinion against open borders or climate change or, any number of hot button issues. And that terrified me in particular because I came of age as a sort of semi-competitive chess player during the Deep Blue Garry Kasparov era. And that was a really formative time in my life when that happened because it was clear to me as a kid that AI was going to take over the chess world and change it forever. And because even when I was, 14, 15, 16, we were using chess engines to analyze games, and these engines were already better than the best guys at the club or the national master, tutor for the local chess community.
We're talking like the early 2000s here?
Yeah, like late 90s, early 2000s, because it was 2000 when Garry Kasparov lost to Deep Blue. And I remember in the run up to that, the adults in the chess world and my local club were saying, they were holding out hope. They were saying, the pure human spirit will prevail. And it was so obvious to me as a kid. It was really like the first time I can remember as a young person being like, holy, the adults are wrong on this one. They're right on everything else. I defer to, 40 and 50-year-olds on how to drive a car. And, I believe there's such a thing as taxes. And I don't know how to get from point A to point Z. But this thing,
Tech, shut the f up, boomer.
Yeah, right. It's like how can you not see this coming? And, it was a very bittersweet I told you so afterwards because everybody was very depressed when Deep Blue won that match. And it wasn't depressing to me because I'd priced it in. Of course, no chance. If the little thing on my home computer is at an international master level, there's no way the best computers aren't better than a strong grandmaster. And so that left a pretty strong imprint on me. The AI's ability to completely outwit any human attempt to circumvent its brute force calculation ability. And when in 2016, when a lot of this was in commercial development for AI use to flag things online for takedowns of information, it was widely dismissed, I think, and laughed at by a lot of people in the Trump movement. But they were saying, they'll say we can't say gay, we'll spell it G-H-E-Y. There was this, there's no stopping the signal. There's no way, they can try censor us all they want. It's never going to work.
Good luck.
And I'm at that point I still had some hair, and I think that's when I tore the last of it out. I was like, you guys are like, I remember this conversation, 25 years ago. I remember this conversation almost verbatim, the same sort of reasoning. Oh yeah, it may look daunting. They may get a couple victories here and there, but the human engineering, the human ingenuity and creativity will always be able to outsmart the machine. And I'm thinking, you don't have a chance. You don't understand how these things work. And this was another really big development for me is when Google Jigsaw, which is effectively the CIA branch of Google, and I can talk about that.
If we will. Yeah.
When Google Jigsaw released something called Perspective API, which was a tool that which ran a toxicity score assessment on everything on the internet. You could actually go to their website. You could plug in a sentence or a paragraph or a page from a book, and it would scan it and it would spit out a toxicity score level. So you could put in William Shakespeare's To Be or Not to Be, and it'll give you like a 14% toxicity score. And you can put in, a Notorious B.I.G. song, and it'll give you like a 54% toxicity score, and it would give you an identity threat score, a hate speech score, a gender identity score,
God.
a misdisinformation score. And I saw this, and this is exactly the way chess engines work. It gives you this sort of probabilistic it gives a readout of lines, and then they'll say negative 0.73, and that will mean black is winning by 0.7 of a pawn, and that sort of thing. And I was like, okay, it works the same way. Language is not infinite in the same way that chess is not. There's only a finite number of words. Every time there's new slang that develops, that can be added very quickly by somebody on the coding side, and it pre-censors you. You get killed in the algorithm from it. And not only that, it allows you to very creatively structure things so that if you have, for example, like a 99% toxicity score, that might automatically delete it. But if it's a 90% toxicity score, it might send it into a purgatory zone where it's shadow banned. And they might set a threshold that, if it's 70% or less toxicity, then it will be allowed, whitelisted effectively, and be allowed to be said. And this I saw in these DARPA documents, and then traced it into the State Department and USAID and basically all across the government and the national security state, that this was being developed as a tool to be able to control the course of elections around the world, to be able to control the rise and fall of political movements. It was effectively an off button for opposition to the U.S. State Department. And when I recognized the totality of that by late 2017, early 2018, it completely changed my life. I started writing a book on this right away in 2016. Weapons of Mass Deletion it was about the AI story.
That's a good name.
It's this idea, it was this idea that AI censorship technology was to speech what nuclear weapons were to warfare, completely changing the face of it forever. You don't need a standing army of 1 million troops to be able to take on another country with 1 million troops. Right. All you need are 2 or 3 atom bombs, and it's over. And you could do this. So you wouldn't need a standing army of hundreds of thousands of manual censors in order to keep up with hundreds of thousands of misinformation purveyors. You just need 2 or 3 lines of code.
Right.
And then late 2017, a law passed in Germany called NetzDG, which effectively required the use of AI scan and ban technology in order to be compliant with German law. It imposed a $54 million fine for each incidence of so-called hate speech at the time that was not removed by the platform within 48 hours. And there was a safe harbor for companies that had AI filters. And then that quickly spread across Europe. And then 2018 is really when Americans started to feel this huge closure of the things that they could talk about online. And it was all coming from this transatlantic government alliance, effectively, between the U.S. and allies, effectively NATO, which was concerned that Brexit in the UK was going to cause Frexit in France if Marine Le Pen won.
Right.
It would cause Gerexit in Germany if the AfD party won. It would cause Spexit in Spain if the Spanish Vox party won. It'll exit in Italy with Matteo Salvini. And so they thought, okay, if we allow free speech on the internet, NATO will dissolve, the EU will dissolve, and then NATO will dissolve, and then there's no enforcement arm for the IMF and the World Bank, so the international banks will collapse. So, it would be the ending scene from Fight Club if we don't censor the internet.
Quick question, Mike, because obviously this is sinister as and you and I are going to be on the same side of this issue with you. The slippery slope of banning free speech is far worse than the alternative. I think we just have to set that as a baseline. Trying to understand where people may think, where the difference between like evil versus like just the right intentions and completely wrong, I guess, like game plan would be. Is it possible that some of the people in these organizations who are coming up with this stuff, be it in NATO or in the EU or all the above, are looking at it like a lot of this stuff is an attack from the East on our systems to try to break us all apart, which is going to fuck us in the long run? Therefore, I guess it's better to censor speech so that doesn't happen?
I think that's bullshit. I think all of Russiagate was bullshit. I think
it was proven.
Yeah, it was complete bullshit. I mean, you have John Brennan, the CIA director, with advanced knowledge before it even happened that Hillary Clinton, what was Brennan's note to Obama, that Hillary Clinton was working on concocting, a narrative that Donald Trump would be backed by the Russians. I think that was in June 2016, July 2016. And the whole thing. But that was simply, they needed that to have the legal predicate to use the tools of the national security state. The CIA is not allowed to go after domestic citizens, domestic politicians, domestic affairs at all.
Yep.
Neither is the State Department, neither is USAID, neither is the Department of War. But they have one get out of Constitution jail free card, and it's called counterintelligence. The CIA can spy on Americans as part of a counterintelligence probe if we suspect those Americans are being used wittingly or unwittingly by a hostile foreign nation state. So you need a Russiagate predicate if you want the CIA to spy on them. The USAID, the corruption factory that I think I've been a big part in blowing open here, they are not allowed. They have their predicate is democracy promotion. They have all these programs to overthrow foreign governments in the name of promoting democracy. If we label a foreign leader a threat to democracy, that they are an autocrat and cracking down on their own people and, ironically, suppressing free speech, attacking the civil society institutions, cracking down on media, then we fund a regime change army within their country, NGOs, trade organizations, union groups, lawyers, judges, parliamentarians, university academics, student groups, ethnic identity groups, gender identity groups. We fund a whole army in order to topple that government in color revolutions if we declare them a threat to democracy. So if you want to unleash that NGO money spigot and create that army here with that government money, you need to come up with a lie that the person you're targeting is a threat to democracy. And lo and behold, what was the big word that they used about Trump? He was a threat to democracy, an autocrat, the same thing.
Dictator, yeah.
Exactly, because that's all they have.
Yep.
I come back to the Derek Zoolander thing. They have one look. That's it. They have one look. And it's the moneymaker for them. Yeah. It's what made them the male models they are. But they need to throw that look, or else they don't have the magic. They can't arm the NGOs with all the money.
And they can't have
it
now.
What's that?
They've killed it now.
They've wounded it. Yeah, it's complicated. There have been a lot of big actions that are partially instated, but there's a long ways to go to bring it to the finish line, and it's getting very bumpy. Mm-hmm. The courts have blocked implementation of a lot of it, and we can get into specifics. And the other side of it is, the executive branch has done, I think, more in 130 days than any executive branch in my lifetime on this, and more than I thought that they would be able to accomplish in 4 years already, just in a little over 4 months. But there are two holdups. There's the judicial branch layer and the legislative branch layer. A huge portion of the Republican side of Congress is juiced by these same skids as the Democrats are. They're internationalists. They represent multinational corporations who want USAID to cut the wind for them, who want State Department International Affairs budgets to ink deals for their companies or to secure markets for them. They want war to secure natural resources or to secure supply lines or to secure territory or to alter the dynamics of trade. Oil and gas, for example, was big on this when it comes to Ukraine, Russia. Yep. Blowing up the Nord Stream pipeline created the giant market for U.S. liquefied natural gas. All of the, Exxon, Chevron, Shell in the UK, Norway, all of these countries made hundreds of billions of dollars because of the CIA via Ukraine blowing up the Nord Stream pipeline. And so, and a lot of that is Republican. And so what we're seeing is that many of these DOGE cuts are not making it through into this big, beautiful bill. I've seen some figure that it was only 5.4% of the DOGE cuts are actually going to be codified.
Can you explain how that works? Because I think a lot of times, we make the mistake of just hearing USAID and DOGE, we're cutting shit, but people have, and I'll speak for myself too, like there's a lack of understanding of exactly how it starts at the beginning of the machine and actually gets to the end result of like finished product. So
Yeah.
when you're saying Doge goes to make a cut, what's the process it fully has to go through for then that to be implemented?
Yeah. Well, maybe we can take it one thing at a time
Sure.
as an example, crystallize that example, and then that'll help sort of explain the system. So take USAID. USAID is a U.S. government agency that was created through an executive order and then codified by law in 1961. And it's been operating as a so-called independent agency since then. But its whole role is a State Department role, in the same way the CIA's role is just a State Department role. And maybe I'll take a little bit of a detour to explain
Sure.
that. USAID is being folded up as an agency so that its remnant can be rolled up into the State Department. So the State Department could just directly run what USAID used to do. And this was the same debate that was had around the time of the creation of the Central Intelligence Agency under the National Security Act of 1947. Ultimately, everything the CIA does is as an assistant support function for either the State Department or the Defense Department.
Mm-hmm.
Everything they do is just the covert side of advancing national interests for the State Department or national security for the Pentagon. That is why the CIA is a junior player at the table in Washington.
Junior.
Yes. I give this example. Think about like The Sopranos, and
you're in the right state for that.
yeah, that's right. So you've got the mob bosses in Jersey and New York. And then you've got these henchmen and muscle who enforce the edicts of, the bosses. And so take someone like Furio, right? Furio is the dude who, a hairdresser owes debt to the family or to the crew. Furio busts in with a baseball bat.
Non te preocupa.
Yeah, right. Gets in your face, breaks your knuckles, destroys your business, and says, leaves you bloody and says, you better be back. I'll be back for the rest of it next week, and if you don't have it, you, your wife, and your dog are dead. And so it's very easy if you are the hairdresser looking at that to be like, holy shit, Furio runs the mafia.
Yeah, I see.
But that's not the case at all. It is going from CIA director to Secretary of State is a massive, massive promotion. Mike Pompeo was the CIA director for Donald Trump. He was promoted to Secretary of State.
Yes.
Leon Panetta was CIA director for Bill Clinton. He was promoted to Secretary of Defense. It is the support role for dirty work that is authorized by the State Department, the DOD, the National Security Council at the White House. And so it's a limited domain. This is a very similar relationship to the FBI and DOJ. Mm-hmm. Everyone, the FBI literally does the Furio work. They break into your home.
Yeah.
They'll raid your underwear drawer. And all manner of dirty tricks. But everything the FBI does has to be authorized by the Justice Department. And the Justice Department is not as sexy in the eyes of the public because people see a sort of thick bureaucratic layer of, pencil necks and nerd type folks and prosecutors with their briefcases. And they see the thug work being carried out by the FBI and they go, oh, the FBI is really running the show. No. The Attorney General determines everything the FBI can do. And it's the same thing with the CIA and the State Department. The State Department determines effectively, together with the White House National Security Council, everything the CIA can do. And CIA directors get fired when they do not obey that chain of command. That's what happened to Alan Dulles. One of the
allegedly.
Well,
he may have still run that from Georgetown. Let's be honest.
Well, there is
a dead president. I just want to throw that out there.
Hey, It's the same thing here, though. Where does that Georgetown network get its power? What you have is if you have competing power factions within Washington and you get tossed out of power, you lose an election, you fall out of favor with the president or the secretary of state, you get tossed from your job, you don't necessarily go gently into that good night. You team up with the other shadow elements who continue to want that president out of power, and you will continue to work with that wider shadow network that are in the NGOs, in the universities, in the big philanthropic political action funds, in other parts of the government that are allied with you and that provide a resistance point. And so there is this recycling factory that happens if you are trying to undermine the president's vision or the secretary of state's declared foreign policy goals, and you try to fight from the inside and you get purged, you glom right on to the other elements that are allied with you to continue that work. I mean, that's who usually cuts your checks. And we're seeing the same thing right now in the censorship space. As we have cut so much of the government censorship infrastructure out of the U.S., those U.S. censors in exile are now all going to Europe to work with their in-power government allies in the UK, in France, in Germany, in the EU to get their big censorship law, the EU Digital Censorship Act, it's technically the EU Digital Services Act, which will have jurisdiction over the United States, and that's their secret weapon. They talk about this openly, that they would be, quote, depressed and dejected if they didn't have their secret weapon, this European law, to force censorship back on America. But getting back to this process, so USAID was, it's, I think technically on July 1, it will no longer exist as an
period.
executive. Right.
Whoa.
Right. It's already functionally non-existent in the sense that its name has been taken off the building. 14,000 employees have been laid off. I believe they only kept a couple hundred hand-picked ones. All of the overseas offices have been closed, and there is basically a small team that is doing, the transition so that on July 1, the remaining function of USAID will be directly under the control of the State Department. This is why Marco Rubio, who is the Secretary of State, is also the USAID administrator, because that function, and they already have so many overlapping functions. It's head spinning, but that is because it's supposed to. USAID was never supposed to be an independent agency. That was always a cover front for it, in the same way that the CIA is. It's I always say when it's too dirty for the CIA, you give it to USAID, and everyone always laughs when I say that, and I try to.
Funny.
No, I know.
Yeah.
But I mean it. That's not an exaggeration. It's like, it's funny to everybody else, but it's like I'm trying to say something very serious when I say it, which is that USAID, there are chains on the CIA. Every covert action undertaken by the Central Intelligence Agency has to be approved in writing by the President of the United States. Every single one had to go through a process called a presidential finding. And this was because that when the CIA started going rogue and presidents started saying, yeah, I didn't know about that. I didn't know the CIA was doing that. Congress, imposed this requirement that they have to get a presidential finding or else it's illegal. Well, USAID, because it is not required to get a presidential finding, can do the dirtiest of dirty work that the CIA could not. If the president doesn't want to give approval for it, doesn't want to be caught giving the sign off for it, then instead of calling it covert action through the Central Intelligence Agency, you run it as discrete democracy promotion through USAID.
It's a shell company, effectively.
Yeah, and it allows a level of secrecy that is not allowed the Central Intelligence Agency. There is no oversight for USAID. This is the motivating reason for folding USAID into the State Department, because it's an independent agency, even though its whole purpose, its sole and exclusive purpose, is to support State Department foreign policy through effectively dual-use programs. We are providing poverty relief in, rural Peru, but there's a sort of philanthropic use front, humanitarian NGO work, but the State Department wants to work with the coca leaves, farmers there, or wants to rally groups of indigenous folks or people in the agriculture labor as part of an effort to control the internal politics of the country. We're doing, public health facilities and vaccine clinics in Pakistan. I mean, this was a major problem for the CIA actually in 2012.
It was a problem for them?
Well, the CIA got busted in 2012 running fake vaccine clinics in Pakistan this is, pull it up.
You gotta love that. Fake in 2012.
2012.
Man, they were ahead of the curve.
Right. Well, but USAID took the baton after this. I can tell you this whole story.
Oh, so they got to blame and just say, it was USAID, sorry.
Well, they vowed not to do it, and then USAID moved into the space.
Right. All right, so what do we got here? Can we scroll up a little bit, Joe?
I got the right thing here.
All right, fake CIA vaccine campaign when the end doesn't justify the means. In early January 2013, a dozen deans from America's premier public health schools wrote President Obama a letter protesting the CIA's use of a faked vaccination campaign in the hunt for Osama.
Now let me stop this right here.
Yeah, I know what this one is now. Yeah,
you're going to get a retail history if you look at CSIS is the military's think tank. They're a major think tank.
Oh, that's what I'm reading.
Yeah, that's what you're reading here. So here's what was happening in the background here. General David Petraeus, who would also become CIA director, declared a stated goal of collecting 85% of the biometrics of every citizen in Central Asia as part of its Afghanistan, Iraq, the works, in order to go through with a program they called identity dominance. And Joe, if you want to pull this up, run a Google image search for Afghanistan Army iris scanning, and just like leave open like the Google image, and I'll show you what I'm talking about here. Okay.
Oh my God.
So here's what was happening at the time. The U.S. government was waging this counterinsurgency, and the problem is they didn't have the identifiable biometrics of the population, and so when there would be huge crowds of protests, we would have satellites flying overhead, and we'd see 10,000 people on the move, but we didn't know who they were. We didn't have their eyeballs. We didn't have their blood samples. If there was a fight, or if there was, if they checked into a hospital, we weren't able to necessarily, track down everything. And so Petraeus declared a doctrine, and it would carried on, and it would be known as identity dominance. If you just pull up a new tab, but if you just stay on this so we can close this out, just like pull, like just zoom into any one of those, or just make it larger.
5, Joe.
And this is what was being done manually.
It's like Sean Ryan's old thumbnail.
Yeah, and you'll see this. They were literally every person they saw. The U.S. military would have to walk up to them and scan their eyeball, and so if you go to if you just go to Google and you just type in identity dominance, and then if you maybe make it like a controlled Boolean search, if you just okay, or you can do it that way, and you'll see the ability to link individuals to their past identities and activities. And this was a U.S. military concept around the need to get the biometric identifiers of literally their goal was, I think, 85% of the population in Iraq, Afghanistan, and by extension Pakistan, because Pakistan was the main training and arming ground since the days of the Mujahideen, when the CIA created the Mujahideen Islamic fundamentalist army, and then trained them in neighboring Pakistan, and then set up, BCCI and the CI proprietary banks to run the drugs and guns through. But So they were running this identity dominance program to collect all the local biometrics. And when the scandal came out, they were saying, "Oh, no. It was we were just trying to get Osama bin Laden. That's why we were using fake vaccine drives."
Pretty sure I saw that in Zero Dark 30 too. They got that one right in there.
But no, this was a biometric collection program. They were doing this. But again, so what the public sees as a vaccine program and a bunch of finger wagging if you don't trust vaccines. But what you have is a Central Intelligence Agency operation. And so that was 2012. It took 18 months for the Central Intelligence Agency to say that it would stop using vaccine clinics and public health facilities to run CIA operations out of. It took them 18 months for them to say we won't do that anymore. After this outcry had played out in a huge amount of time. So look at what else was going on in 2014 at that time. Just go to Google and type in USAID fake HIV clinic, Cuba.
Hey guys, if you haven't already subscribed, please hit that subscribe button. It's a huge, huge help. Thank you.
All right, what do we got?
So CIA says, okay, we're not going to do this anymore.
Fake U.S. HIV prevention program and secret, what was that? Secret anti-Cuba scheme. Okay, go down, Joe. A report from the Associated Press revealed that the U.S. government has been secretly sending young Latin Americans to Cuba under the guise of health and civics programs, including an HIV prevention workshop in hopes of provoking political change in the country. Advocates say the scheme could undermine international trust of U.S. global health efforts for years to come. According to documents from the investigation, since 2009, USAID has paid nearly a dozen young people from Venezuela, Costa Rica, and Peru to work undercover and scout for people they could turn into political activists.
And then I'm going to read this one here.
Sure.
According to interviews with staff members, the U.S. government sent some workers into Cuba under the disguise of tourists. In another case, workers were told to set up an HIV workshop, which memos called, quote, the perfect excuse for perpetuating the U.S. government's goals. The perfect excuse, HIV prevention workshops. Now, USAID does these public health programs in every country in the world, effectively. It's one of the top programs at USAID by expenditures, all these public health programs. And another thing that happened that same year with USAID in Cuba was the ZunZuneo scandal, which I've talked about a bunch.
Z-U-N...
Yeah, you just pull up the Wikipedia for ZunZuneo.
Okay.
And there's a great Guardian article on this as well. Okay. And you'll see another reason that this was structured through USAID.
All right, so ZunZuneo was an online social networking and microblogging service created by the USAID and marketed to... Oh, yeah, I've seen a clip of you talking about this. Marketed to Cuban users following recommendations by the Commission for Assistance to a Free Cuba. It was covertly developed as a long-term strategy to encourage Cuban youth to revolt against the nation's government, fomenting a political spring. The service officially began operating in 2010, but ran out of money 2 years later because of its clandestine and subversive nature. It became a target of criticism.
Yeah, and I just want to, because the next two paragraphs here on the origins and funding are very useful for understanding the structuring of CIA work through USAID. So ZunZuneo, so this was a complete Twitter knockoff. Literally, ZunZuneo, as you'll see, it says it means like a hummingbird's call. It was literally the Twitter bird. At one point, they even asked Jack Dorsey to help run it, and it had the retweet button.
They got drunk Don Draper to come up with that name,
right.
Twitter, but for Cuba.
Right? No, exactly. Now, what was happening? You have to remember, at this time, the Arab Spring was popping off.
Yes,
and this was the high watermark of CIA social media work. This grew out of this whole Jared Cohen State Department policy planning staff idea that instead of the CIA running color revolutions through U.S. embassies, consulates, and CIA station houses, we could run through social media and galvanize supercharged street revolutions by using Twitter hashtags, Facebook pages, YouTube video calls to action. Basically, the State Department said to the CIA, "What are we doing? Just trying to recruit people." Through churches and union groups, like all the young people who are the battering ram of this whole operation, they're all on Twitter, they're all on Facebook, they're all on YouTube. So, and you can, if you want to pull up a new tab just real quick, you'll see just type in an article called Condi's Party Starter, Jared Cohen, for Condi as in Condoleezza Rice. If you just pull, just like in a new tab.
He's over here. He's going to pull it.
What else?
Jared Cohen, you'll see it. I think it's the New Yorker. You'll just get an idea of this. There's a million of these.
Got it. Here we go.
Yeah, and this is 2007. Yeah.
Oh wow,
So-
way back.
Yeah. Well, this was because
During Bush, Condi's and
right,
Yep.
and Jared Cohen was kept by Hillary Clinton in the State Department. There, he was the young gun whiz kid who was brought into the State Department's policy planning staff, which is really the central coordinating place at state that coordinates overt activity by the State Department with covert activity by the Central Intelligence Agency. And so Jared Cohen was a very, very young guy when he got to the policy planning staff. He was in his mid-20s. Young kid, he was brought in to essentially provide a young person's view on how to do, this sort of work. And he would form movements.org for, student movements and young people movements, particularly in the Middle East and Central Asia. These big conflict zone places, during the Bush era. And he looked around at these 40, 50, 60-year-olds on the policy planning staff and said, you guys are completely out of touch. Everyone in these countries are using this new social media, which had just come out. Facebook came out in 2004.
Yep.
YouTube came out in 2005. Twitter came out in 2006. 2007 was the year the smartphone came out. iPhone 1.
Yep.
And he said, this thing is lightning in a bottle. We want to get people mobilized. This is the biggest mobilization force on earth. We can use this to foment revolution, start parties. This was the party starter in Tunisia in the Arab Spring. This was the party starter in Egypt.
This.
Yes, they were Facebook revolutions, Twitter revolutions. And so the Central Intelligence Agency and USAID were so inspired by this Arab Spring, they wanted to get a Cuban Spring, a street revolution using social media in Cuba. The problem was Cuba at the time had banned Twitter. So it was blocked. It was a criminal offense for VPNs. Attempts had been unsuccessful to try to get a node to do that. So what they did is and if you go back to the Wikipedia, you'll see how dirty this is.
ZunZuneo.
ZunZuneo, yeah. So
First tab.
so this whole thing was structured in order to make it look like it was by Cubans for Cubans. That way, it would not trigger the counterintelligence capacities of Cuba. It would not be banned under the Twitter ban. It would look like it was set up by Cubans as a social media networking site for Cubans, but it was secretly created for, funded by, and backed by USAID. And you'll see what they did is they took it was funded by millions of dollars of U.S. taxpayer funds concealed as humanitarian funds designated for Pakistan. Now, Julian, I don't know if you've seen a world map lately, but
It's right there. Yeah, that one's actually from the 80s. That's a bad example. I'm sorry. It's an old globe.
well, I'm looking at that globe right here,
We can count before.
and I can't even see. I see Pakistan. I can't even see Cuba on the same hemisphere view.
Yeah, but it's a big galaxy, Mike. We're one little rock right here. We're so close to each other. I'm fucking with you. He's like so upset at that.
If you went to usaspending.gov and you looked up the grant for this, you would see humanitarian relief for Pakistan. You would see fuck all about how the funds are actually being used. And look at what they actually did here. So contractors funded by USAID set up a Byzantine system of front companies using a Cayman Islands bank account and recruiting unsuspecting executives who would not be told of the company's ties to the U.S. government. Private companies, Creative Associates International, they are a major CIA USAID contractor. It's CAI. It's not CIA, it's CAI. And you'll see they were also working with USAID to secretly fund the hip-hop movement in Cuba to overthrow the Cuban government through anti-government rap anthems, which is a huge USAID. The State Department has, I can't even tell you how hard the CIA runs the rap game. It's insane. The State Department just recently brought 22 hip hop artists from all these different conflict zones. I can walk you through in Bangladesh how USAID was funding rap musicians, reporting back to the State Department about how the songs were designed to create street protests, producing their music videos. We can even watch some of these music videos if you want to get into this.
You're talking about ones from other countries right now.
Yeah. I can show you the internal document.
Yeah.
Okay,
Let's do it.
but
That's why you're here. Let's go.
But just stick with this for one sec because I want to just show you, make this really clean.
This guy's a fire hose. I love it. There's so much here. It's
Okay,
awesome.
so they get these two contractors at USAID. So again, that's now money coming from us as taxpayers from our income tax to USAID, then subcontracted down into two different levels of subcontractors who are then funneling the money through a Byzantine layer of Cayman Islands offshore bank accounts, which, by the way, was a structure that was originally conceived of by the Central Intelligence Agency. You can look up a guy named Paul Helliwell, who was the CIA's lead lawyer during the Cold War. Just type in on a new tab, Paul Helliwell, CIA, Castle Bank and Trust. This is a good example of
Castle
this.
Banking, yeah. Got it.
And then we'll come back to this Wikipedia in a second. Paul Helliwell is
Let's pull that over. We got it.
Hellillwell. Oh, okay, all right.
How the CIA helped Disney conquer Florida?
Yeah,
Does
well,
this sound
because
like
Paul,
him?
well, yes, because Paul Helliwell went from being the CIA's lawyer to Disney's lawyer.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's convenient.
We have to understand Disney was a big time propaganda company for the War Department during World War II, during the Cold War. This connects to the whole media apparatus that where the U.S. government did favors for Disney did favors for the U.S. government. Today, now a lot of Disney media properties are also wrapped up in this whole thing. But if you run a search, this is I haven't seen this particular article, but let's just see if you run Control F for Castle Bank, or just Castle. Okay, well, just go to Castle Bank. Just look up Castle Bank and Trust.
Castle Bank, just that.
Yeah,
No
just
Helliwell?
that. Yeah,
Okay.
there you go.
In the Bahamas.
Yeah, in the Bahamas.
Good
yeah.
location.
Yeah. Okay, so it was a Bahamas bank that was involved in tax evasion, and this is a CIA proprietary bank. Yeah, founded in the 1960s by Paul Helliwell.
Yep.
Who is
Oh, he was an OSS guy. He was an OG.
yeah.
Wow.
Well, this started
Yeah.
right away. I mean, this is really what created the rise of offshore banking in the essentially the OSS found that the Vatican Bank was a very I'm not joking.
We're hitting every keyword. This is incredible.
Well,
going.
but this is
They
true.
found that the Vatican Bank was what?
Okay, a great source on this if you want to read it. This great book by
Gerald Posner.
by Paul Williams. It's called Operation Gladio.
Okay.
The Unholy Alliance between the CIA, the Vatican, and the mob. And it's a great book. It goes through this history, but there's a dozen other sources that you can find this in as well. But we were at war with Mussolini in Italy,
Yes.
and that was a conflict that really started in the 1930s. And at the time, you had Mussolini cracking down on two forces within Italy: the mob, the Italian mafia in the south, and the Vatican, and the Vatican. There'd always been this, multinodal factor of power in the Roman Empire and in Italy between the church and the state, and the church commanded a lot of allegiance, and the Mussolini was threatened by the Vatican's power and its influence and its opposition to Mussolini policies. And Mussolini was also a very strong law and order guy who was cracking down on organized crime. The enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Right.
And that made the Vatican and the Southern Italian Mafia very, very, very close allies of the U.S. military and of the OSS, which was the military branch that was the predecessor to the CIA. And so we used the Southern Italian Mafia networks as both paramilitaries within Italy to be for conflict against the Italian police and the Italian military, as well as for a beachhead, because they controlled the ports. So they controlled the ability to get supplies, to get guns, to get money, to get cash, to get food, to get aid. So all of that was an organized crime network that was a powerful, powerful ally of the U.S. military and a protected ally of the U.S. military because of how useful it was. Same thing with the Vatican Bank. The Vatican Bank Vatican City is a sovereign nation state.
Yes.
It's the smallest country in the world, but because it is a sovereign entity, it can set its own banking rules, and it effectively served as a way to shield, to wash money. You could launder money through the Vatican Bank and no one would know because it was effectively independent of the international finance system. And so the CIA teamed up with organized crime and with the Vatican Bank in order to run covert operations money through. And
So this is when it became CIA after the war you're talking about.
well,
When
the
OSS
very first when the National Security Act came out in 1947, NSC, and if you want to follow along, you can just literally Google all this stuff as I talk about it. NSC 1-1 was called the I forget the title of it, but the thrust of it was, I believe it was called the U.S. interests in Italy. It was about if you just look up NSC 1/1.
saying N is in Nancy?
Yeah, as a National Security Council. This is the National Security Council is the interagency White House coordination for the CIA, the State Department. How do you get unified action between the CIA, the State Department, the Defense Department, the Justice Department? It runs through the National Security Council. Yeah, so this is 1-1. The position of the United States with respect to Italy. So you'll see this is November 1947. And this memo is all about how how important it is for the United States to secure control over Italy as it opens up for its first democratic elections after the war.
Yep.
And basically says, listen, there's two people running this. There's our puppet and there's the Soviet Union's puppet.
Yep.
And our boy better win, or else if Italy falls, all of Europe is going to fall. And so if you go to another memo now, George Kennan from the policy planning staff, look up the inauguration of organized political warfare.
The inauguration of organized political warfare.
Organized, yeah. Let's see if that one.
Policy planning staff memorandum?
Yeah, this is
1948?
Yeah, but there's a version that's April 30th, 1948,
Okay,
which is
let's
just
do
12
April-
days after.
Yeah, let's do April.
But you'll see that's on the state.gov. If you, actually, look at the Wilson Center, that third link there. Oh, right there.
That
yeah,
one?
yeah.
Yeah, there it is. April 30th, 1948. It was up
Yeah,
there.
this is 12 days after the U.S. Here you go. If you just
Oh, wow. This is the actual document,
yeah,
too.
yeah. Now this wasn't declassified, I believe, until 2005, from 1948.
Okay. Do you
Now-
want to read this?
Yeah, I'm gonna read the key parts of this. But you know what's crazy? I give lectures all over the place to folks in the diplomacy world, and everybody knows George Kennan, who's really the godfather of modern diplomacy in many ways. He was the first head of the policy planning staff at the State Department, which is one of those powerful places in there, and he was the author of the containment strategy against Russia, the author essentially of our Cold War meta strategy. And he was famously the guy who gave the CIA its plausible deniability powers. He was the author of NSC 10-2, which is the national security memo that that gives the CIA plausible deniability, so that gives them their ability to lie publicly.
Yes.
But so everybody knows about NSC 10-2 from 1948, and I've never been in front of a crowd who's ever read this incredible document from just 2 months before NSC 10-2, before CIA plausible deniability, by the very guy. And here's what this says. So the inauguration of organized political warfare. And he goes on to say that this ranges from overt actions such as political alliances and economic measures, which what we would now think of as USAID. ERP here refers to the Europe Relief Program, the Marshall Plan. Us sending huge amounts of money into Europe for post-war reconstruction, but in return we get political influence over everybody, all the governments of Europe, because they're dependent on us for bribe money. And so he says, so it ranges from those overt actions like our alliances and overt aid, as well as white propaganda, to such covert operations as clandestine support of friendly foreign elements, black psychological warfare, and even encouragement of paramilitary regime change, effectively is what he's saying here. You know? It says the creation, success, and survival of the British Empire has been due in part to British understanding and application of political warfare.
Yep.
And this is, if anyone's seen Lawrence of Arabia, I mean, they've been doing this a long time, the Brits. And so they're worried at the time about the Bolsheviks using organized political warfare, and then if we don't create this capacity to have a organized covert operations arm of the U.S. government, then we will lose to whoever does, like the, like they mentioned, the Bolsheviks will.
Real quick, Mike, I don't like, there's so much information, like I don't like getting you off a flow, but I do have a question there that I think is important.
Yeah.
Do you think there's a middle ground there, as painful as that is?
Of course.
In the sense that if you don't do it, someone else will, so you have to do something?
Of course.
Okay.
I have my own opinions on that and how to strike the balance, but I think it's important for people to understand the anatomy of the patient that they're operating on before they make conclusions about how to do the surgery. And most people don't even know the anatomy of the thing. They form opinions and don't even know what they're breaking or messing with before they get there. Because I get a lot of people. I feel the same way about USAID.
Yeah.
The New York Times and Washington Post credit me for taking down USAID. I'm not even taking credit. But the fact is that I've been painted as the guy who took down USAID. And I was put in a weird position because I think that there is a role for a USAID function in being able to project soft power influence. Yes. And the issue is not necessarily that the capacity exists, but that it has gone so rogue, and the way it has defined national interest has become so perverse. I mean, the final straw for me was when USAID was funding censorship laws in foreign countries, right. and not only that, funding censorship laws for the explicit purpose of taking out U.S. social media companies, going after, telling Europe, USAID having formal programs to get Europe to crack down on X and Facebook. You can't do that under the First Amendment. So you have USAID funding foreign governments to go after U.S. national champions. This is what we have USAID to stop.
Right.
When I was at the State Department, we have a national champions policy. We define U.S. interests as being U.S. citizens, U.S. multinational corporations, U.S. resource interests. We run whole operations to protect U.S. companies. And USAID was running whole operations to destroy U.S. companies just because they belong to a political affiliation.
It got so bad that it got so big that it boomeranged back on itself, essentially.
It became the easy button
right.
to win a political fight. Use this because it's an organized political warfare capacity that you're sitting on. If you occupy that office and you're losing the political war right now. So, the analogy I give is it's like there's a thumbie war in politics. One side wins, the other side wins. But, if you were just able to cheat and use your index finger, this thing's a lot more nimble, and powerful. You're not allowed to use it unless you're cheating, but it's always there. It's always there. If they really start getting you up. And that's what this organized political warfare capacity is at state, at USAID, at CIA, at DOD. And here's what Kennan says.
We're back on this document.
We have been handicapped, however, by a popular attachment to the concept of a basic difference between peace and war, by a tendency to view war as a sporting contest outside all political contexts, and by, you'll see he crosses out, by a public yearning for a political cure-all. And he says, let me soften it, a national tendency to seek a political cure-all, and by a reluctance to recognize the realities of international relations. Saying the American people don't understand the need for us to create this dirty work capacity. Now, if you scroll down here, you'll see that it goes on, talks about the Truman Doctrine, and I want to get to the Italy part of this. There's so much good stuff in here. I have a pinned tweet I have a 45-minute video that's pinned to the top of my X account. There you go. You'll see on paragraph 5 here that goes through this in detail, but. It's at Mike Ben Cyber, by the way. I have a 45-minute video
links
on this.
Links down below.
Literally goes through all the highlights. This document will change your entire vision of the Central Intelligence Agency, the national security apparatus, because this is in the moment we were setting it up. And it says, okay, if you scroll to the bottom, it says, in having been engaged, okay, we cannot afford to leave unmobilized our resources for covert political warfare. We cannot afford in the future, in perhaps more serious political crises, to scramble into impromptu covert operations as we did at the time of the Italian elections. What he says in this memo is, God, that Italy operation worked so well. We worked with the mob. We worked with the Vatican. We worked with the Catholic charities. We worked with the unions, and we broke up opposition party meetings. We stuffed ballot boxes. We imported the propaganda arm, and it worked. And you can actually see. I think it was Miles Copeland who published a book afterwards. He was one of the OSS and then CIA guys, the original gang. He wrote a book called Cloak and Dagger, and in the book he says if we had not intervened through the CIA on that election, we would have lost 60-40. But we tilted that election by working with the mob. And he even talks openly, as the guy running that operation, that they worked with the mob, they worked with the church, and thank God we did that, or else the commies would have won, and then there might have never been an election in Italy again. But I bring that up to say that you have this. They saw the success of that in Italy, and then internationalized that and said, you know what? Actually, this is the template for what the CIA is going to do. It's not just going to be an intelligence collection and analysis arm. It's going to have an operations track, and you'll see here. This is right before that was all created. And if you just scroll down a little, or actually go, I think, yeah, okay, you'll see actually at the top of this page, he says it a dozen times in this. Okay, says where they should be fitted into the structure of this government and how the Department of State should exercise this direction and coordination. And then if you go the next page, there might be 2 pages. Yeah, here you go. You'll see there are all these references. Go one more page over. Yeah, okay, I'm sorry, one more. Yeah. Well, covert political warfare must be controlled by the department. He's talking about the Department of State. That's this. The direction should not be physically in the Department of State. This is the more true when it is realized that the considerable funds necessary for such an operation could not be concealed in the Department of State's budget. Thus, therefore, this operation must find cover elsewhere. Such cover would permit a direct chain of command from the Secretary of State as the natural meeting ground for this. And then you'll see there should be promptly established under a Directorate of Political Warfare Operations, and basically says the State Department should run it, but it should be somewhere else besides the State Department. And that is
deniable.
That is where the CIA's plausible deniability authorization came in. This is 2 months before CIA got plausible deniability, carte blanche under an NSC 10-2. It's a State Department function.
Thank you guys for checking out this clip. If you haven't already subscribed, please subscribe and hit the like button on this video. It is a huge, huge help. And if you'd like to check out this clip's full podcast episode, that link is in the description below or right here. And finally, you can follow me on Instagram and X by using the links in my description below.